Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thank you so much for being here. I love spending this time with you. It's been so just rewarding on all levels to hear from you and to hear what is interesting, where I lost you. And because you've given me such great feedback, some of you love the forecast. You want to hear what's happening and what is, what's the astrology of the moment. And some of you love the interviews and you love the call to action, but the forecast is a little bit, it's like too much over my head. And so, what I've decided to do with the show is that 2 weeks out of every month, we are going to have a very special episode called The Future Report. And in that episode, I'll talk about some of the ongoing trends that are taking place and how the astrology lines up with those trends. And so today is one of those Future Report episodes. And what I'm going to be talking about specifically is I'm going to be talking about the role of Neptune and also answering the question of why does everything feel so much right now? And so we'll dive into that and we'll talk about the upcoming Jupiter in Gemini. There's some big transitions happening. And so I want to alleviate any concerns. If you don't know anything about astrology, if you don't believe in astrology, I don't know why, but if astrology is like a new language for you, don't worry. I will put this into terms that anyone can understand, including people who are well seasoned astrologers. What's happening in the world right now is too important not to talk about. Astrology gives us a framework to understand why things are taking place and to understand why we might be feeling the way we're feeling. So today we're going to talk about the future report. Dun, dun, dun. I feel like I need some kind of special music here. And I want to intro the future report with just telling you a little bit of a personal story. So sit down, take a sip of coffee or tea or, water, hydrate, and take a deep breath. So I have to tell you that when we go through times in our lives where outer planets that are moving in the heavens today are making specific geometric relationships or aspect relationships to points in our personal chart, we go through periods of major transition. We go through periods of loss. We have new ways of defining ourselves on the other side of that. And right now, I just started one of those transits. And it's interesting because it involves the planet Neptune, which is one of the planets I want to feature the most right now in this episode today. Neptune's a very big player hanging out in the background, and Neptune relates to the ways our culture is evolving through pop culture, through the arts, through the stories we're telling. So Neptune's influence is palpable right now. And Neptune has just started. Uh, for those of you who know astrology, you'll appreciate this. Neptune has just started opposing my Mercury. When Neptune's opposing one of our personal planets, we can feel like we're going into a very foggy period. And it feels like, where do I find my sense of direction? And sometimes it can actually be confusing. And Mercury relates to how we communicate. It relates to how we do our work, kind of the details and routines of our lives. When we go through Neptune transits, we can feel like we're walking around in a fog. And what I recommend to my clients or anyone I work with is that, when you're walking or driving in the fog, you can't see 5 miles ahead of you or even a mile ahead of you. All you can see is the next foot or two in front of your car and where the light is. And so if you keep driving 1 foot at a time, following that light, then eventually you're going to get to your destination. And that's what happens when we go through Neptune transits. Collectively, we are in a big Neptune transit this year and next year as Neptune moves through the last degrees of Pisces on its way into Aries. And so all of us are walking around in a bit of a fog, not really clear where we're going. We know the direction. Many of us are intentional. We know the direction that we want to go in our lives. We know the goals that we've set, but the larger unfolding story of where we're going as a culture is still a little foggy. And that's for a reason. During Neptune transits, we have this genius level creativity. Neptune makes our auras more porous. It makes our right brain creative hemisphere more activated. And so the gift of imagination helps to make a pathway for the future. And this is what's happening for all of us. We are in a time of creative visioning, in a time of dreaming, in a time of imagining the possibilities for ourselves and for the world. And so it's really important for us not to be doom scrolling. I mean, a little bit of doom scrolling is warranted in these times, but not to be consumed with things that check us out of our imaginations and of our creative potentiality, but to actually be delving into the mysteries of the mystical sides of ourselves, of working in communities and groups and finding ways to vision with one another. And Neptune is at the 29th degree of Pisces. And the 29th degree of any sign is what we call a critical degree because the energy is in flux. The planet isn't quite into its new cycle, but it's not, it's like almost done with its previous cycle. So it's split. And therefore, the sense of who we are in our culture, the sense of our artistry, of how we express ourselves, of the stories we tell, all of that is changing. I did an Instagram live with my friend Bonnie Gillespie, who was on my show last week. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to it, you need to go back and listen to that episode because she says just incredible nuggets of wisdom. And in our Instagram, we talked about Neptune. And it's funny because we co-lead a group called Aligned MCs, and MC is the midheaven in astrology, which is the point of your mission, your calling, your purpose in terms of how you express yourself publicly. And aligned, of course, who doesn't want to be aligned to their purpose? So we lead this group together and it's awesome. And we have these incredible conversations about just various topics. We look at individual charts and we find out where your chart is in relation to those larger outer planet transits, eclipses, etc. And we help people navigate pathways to healing or pathways to success. So we were talking, that's a digression. So Bonnie and I were talking about Neptune. And what was funny is I had a chart up on my computer screen, and it was right over Bonnie's chart on the Zoom screen. And what Bonnie was showing this chart, and everyone could see this chart except for me. I was looking at the same kind of chart, but it was on my computer in front of Bonnie's chart. And the way that it was situated on my computer, it looked like she said, "Okay, can you see it now?" And I would say, "Nope, it's still the chart for the full moon." And in that moment, it was so clear to us that this is Neptune at the 29th degree. I'm seeing something, my own story, my own view, my own perspective. You're seeing something, your own story, your own view, your own perspective. And we are seeing two different things. And yours looks true to you, mine looks true to me. But there's a truth in between them. Now, let's pan out from this metaphor and apply it to what's happening politically or what's happening with different relationships that, in your life. There are almost like two different stories or multiple stories operating at the same time with any given situation. And when you recognize that there's a connecting thread between the stories, there's a truth in between your truth and another person's truth, or your group's truth and another group's truth. When you identify those invisible connecting threads and the truth that connects all of us, then we can eliminate and suspend judgment of this is wrong, this is right. And we can come to a meeting place and say, well, whoa, okay, this is your story. This is your truth. This is my story. This is my truth. Here's where they relate. Here's where they differ. And this is important because as we move forward through this year, July 2nd, Neptune is going to be stationing retrograde. So everything that's taking place right now in the next 2 weeks in our future report is connected to this Neptune transit, this Neptune station retrograde. Even if you don't know technically what that means, you can hopefully feel the palpable waves of this, like we're trying to see through the fog. So everything in the next couple of weeks is overshadowed by this Neptune influence. So when Neptune stations retrograde on July 2nd, and it is and it's going to station retrograde at 29:55. And that's just a few minutes away from what we call the world point. The world point is that 0 degrees Aries, 0 degrees of a cardinal sign. And when something happens at that point, we see bigger global shifts and transitions as a result. So there's like a big punctuation mark around that, around early July, but leading up to July, we're feeling this. And this is something that we're going to feel off and on until 2026 when Neptune's in Aries. And there we are. Okay, I need to take a deep breath. You probably need to take a deep breath too. Go ahead and take a deep breath. So, what can we do? What can we do with this confusion, with the everything feels like a lot right now? I don't know what to believe, what's true, what's not. One beautiful thing about Neptune is that Neptune pulls us into our intuition. And so, if thinking about that fog analogy, if you're driving in the fog, all you can do is really feel your way through. Pay attention to the signals you're seeing, look at the road, look that 1 foot in front of you, and feel your way through. And so, in the midst of this cycle changing, we have an awakening of our own spiritual depth and understanding of our own inner guidance system. And so it's a good time to be developing your intuition in a really specific way. And it's a good time to be in meditation and prayer, quieting yourself, opening up to your own guidance in whatever form it reaches you. So if you want to start working with a therapist or a healer, or maybe watching more YouTube channels where people are channeling information, this is a good time to really access your own understanding of spirit and of the paranormal, or of your relationship with your divine source, with God, goddess, with your own spiritual foundation. Neptune entered Pisces in 2012. And I've been really fortunate to be able to work with a lot of different types of people in that time doing this work. And what's been happening is that Neptune entered Pisces, and it's like we had this collective waking up to our spiritual selves. And at the same time, we've seen a lot of the religious institutions, and in particular, those patriarchal organized religious institutions, we've seen a lot of the ways in which corruption and corrupt behavior has been at the foundation of those institutions. And so many of us have really become disillusioned with those religions. We've become more open to identifying the spiritual nature of ourselves outside of a religious context and ideology and dogma. And this is something that happens when Neptune moves through Pisces. We can look back at examples of this when in the 1800s, for example, when the Theosophical movement and the spiritualist movement started to emerge, and previous Neptune cycles, that we all, I'm thinking about that REM song. We're all in the corner in the background losing our religion. And so as a result of that, it's like, well, where's my myth? Where's my mythology? Where's my guiding story? Because I think that's one thing that religion does. It offers us a guiding story to navigate the moral decisions of our lives, to create a structure of a community. So many of us who were raised in religious families and ideologies, those religions became, or for me in particular, and I don't know for a number of people I've talked to, religion is an organizing principle. Every Sunday you go to church. On Wednesdays you go to Sunday school. You go to First Communion. You have all these sacraments, and every religion has its own practices that create a structure, a scaffolding of support, and a community. And once we start to question that truth, then it really opens us up to question all truth everywhere. And so during this time, what I've seen is a lot of people latching on to something to create those scaffoldings of support that religion does. And we see conspiracy theories, we see cults. I don't know if you have seen all of these documentaries about cults, but they have just been like next level. And so we have a lot of these kinds of movements emerging. And that's one of the shadow sides, one of the aspects of Neptune and Pisces that I think we're going to start to see not completely closing or not completely ending, but starting to be clearer about over the next couple of years. So we need a guiding parable. We need a guiding myth. We need stories. We are oriented towards stories. And so over the next few years, I think it's important for all of us to really be wise about the stories we're telling and the stories we're living into. Now, I'm going to segue that into Jupiter. Arguably, the most influential moment in our future report features Jupiter's move into Gemini on the 25th. To give you a context of Jupiter's cycle, Jupiter stays in one sign for about a year, and it moves around the whole zodiac in in about 12 years. And so Jupiter relates to our faith. It actually does relate to religion and spirituality. And it relates to what are the philosophical movements that are taking place at this time being the whole year. So Jupiter enters Gemini on the 25th. And this transit is exciting for me because it's my Jupiter return. And because Jupiter has a 12-year increment, if those of us who were born on those 12, who are turning 12 or 24 or 36 or 48, those of us who are having those 12-year incremental birthdays this year, those of us are having our Jupiter return. And for air signs in general, so that's Libra, Gemini, and Aquarius, this is Jupiter shines a bright light in our lives this year. And so it gives us the ability to really create, to really set intentions, and to watch those intentions come to fruition over the next couple of years, over the next 12 years specifically. But over the next couple of years, we start to really see those intentions sprouting and beginning to appear in our lives. Jupiter in Gemini says, we're going to be telling a lot of stories. And, Gemini is the sign of communication. It's also the sign of news and media. It's the sign of travel, so transportation, things like, trains, planes, and automobiles, or bikes, how we get from one place to another. And wherever Jupiter is, it is blowing things up to a great big proportion. So in those sectors, we see growth, we tend to see growth, and we tend to see a light shown on anything that needs to be repaired. And so I think some of the stories that we're going to want to be following are the way that Boeing is moving into space and regulations around how we make our lanes and the safety protocols. I think we're also going to see talk about high-speed railways, different means of transportation. Next year, we have a couple of cycles that relate to the possibility of Airbuses and flying cars and major changes within transportation. So automatic driving for trucking, buses moving more to electric and hydrogen fuel cell technologies. We're going to see electrifying our police fleets and things like that. So there's a big movement that's taking place next year and the year after, when Uranus, which is about technology, moves into Gemini. And so this year we get a preview of what companies emerge as leaders in these industries. Well, we might see some with like space and aerospace and engineering and defense and things like that, communications, news, social media, the ways that we connect with one another and share information. So there's Jupiter magnifies the potential of these industries. And in our own personal lives, Jupiter gives us faith in, for better or for worse, in what we're hearing, in what we're reading, in what information we're taking in. So we want to be very carefully curated in terms of who we're paying attention to and what we are subjecting our intellect to. So if you think back about what was happening 12 years ago, then you can get a sense of this Jupiter cycle. One amazing thing about astrology is that it's cycles. I mean, we're talking about planetary cycles. And just like you would follow economic cycles and you would follow weather patterns, astrological patterns repeat themselves over and over again. And so usually what happens with Jupiter transits is that the storylines spiral forward. So think about what was taking place in your life in 2012, in 2000. These are going to be themes that show up for you again, mysteriously and magically, and ask for your attention. If you have your chart handy, if you know where Gemini is in your chart, then you can see the area of your life where there will be growth and expansion. Sometimes, and the thing is about Jupiter is we can't judge it. This is good, this is bad, this is right, this is wrong. Jupiter says suspend all of that judgment and trust that anything that opens up in your life right now with communication, with teaching, reading, learning, speaking, writing, news, trust that it is for the purpose of your growth. Next, in our future report, we're going to skip ahead a little bit. And Mars is doing some very interesting things over this next 2 weeks. Mars is the planet that relates to how we protect ourselves. It's also the planet of conflict. It's the planet of passion. And Mars is making its presence known. It's in its own sign, which means things could feel more volatile, which means we want to be more cautious with how we express our anger. Mars meets up with Chiron on the 29th, and it meets up with Eris on the 2nd of June. And these are, Chiron's a little planetoid, and Eris is a dwarf planet. And so you might not be familiar with these influences if you don't know astrology. But what Mars does when it makes any kind of aspect with a point, a chart point, is it's like an activator. And so it stirs the pot. And the one on the second in particular, I'm looking at because Eris is associated with the willingness to advocate for a cause, even if it means that you're going to disrupt the status quo. And so this is the influence that carries us into June. There's like a feeling of things are unsettled. And Gemini is one of the faster moving signs. I mean, it's ruled by Mercury. So there's a lot of like high intensity thinking taking place, transmitting information over the airways. It's probably going to be good for us to turn off our phones, to turn off our computers, and to really be grounded and doing practices that connect us with the earth, because there's a lot of static in the air. And this is it's especially true on the 3rd of June when Mercury enters Gemini. That's a lot of Gemini influence. And so Gemini is wonderful for having a party, for getting together socially, for sharing information and ideas with friends, for brainstorming, for starting projects, for thinking through a complex problem and solving it, for putting together puzzles. I mean, Gemini is really helpful and useful for getting our mind to work in very creative ways. Sometimes, though, it can be distracting. It's like, it's like having too many books that you want to read. And so you take a trip to the bookstore, you buy all these books, and they sit on your nightstand. I have a Gemini moon, so this is something that happens frequently for me. So Gemini can be that need a little bit of discerning of what do I want to take into my mind. And so we want to be careful with what we're filling our thoughts with. And so small doses of news, going back to that overarching Neptune theme, we have a lot of creative potentiality right now. And so it's going to be important for us to be directing our thoughts and our intentions and our feelings in ways that align with where we see ourselves and where we'd like to be. When I was writing my book, Modern Day Magic 8 Simple Rules to Realize Your Power and Shape Your Life, I had a lot of realizations about the ways in which those painful and difficult and traumatic and grief filled experiences in our lives are actually sources of power. That the emotions that we feel when we are going through a major loss or when we have been hurt in some ways, it brings our ego down to its baseline, and it gives our whole entire nervous system this reboot. And when our ego doesn't have as much voice or as much power, then what's allowed to emerge is pure purpose, pure potential, pure heart. And it's ironic because I was writing my book and going through a lot of really personal struggles. If you've read my book, you know that being on a fertility journey, starting a family was part of that process. And I realized through that time that if I kept making these people who had hurt me in my life villains, then I would never really be able to fully integrate all of the shadow aspects of myself. And there's a lot of power in our shadows. In fact, our shadows really run the show in a lot of ways. And we'll have to do another episode just about that, because I can hear some of you thinking, what do you mean? What are you talking about? What's a shadow? What are you talking about? So I will bring in a guest and we will have a shadow episode. Don't worry. And keep a lookout for it, because this is a very interesting. Working with shadows and doing shadow work has been one of the greatest mind-blowing, mind-expanding self-discovery experiences I've ever had. So telling a different story about my past traumas and about those difficult experiences gave me the ability to, one, glean all of this amazing insight and information that I can share with you and share through my book and through my courses and things like that. But also, it's given me access to a power and a resource that I didn't have before. So there's power in story. Jupiter in Gemini says there's power in story. Mercury in Gemini says there's power in story. The sun in Gemini says there's power in story. And so these next 2 weeks really unpack some of the stories that you find yourself caught in, those repeated loops, the repetitive loops, or the storyline that you have about your relationship. She's always doing this. He's always doing this. Oh, he's just going to do that. How can you get into that story and break it apart? I hear this all the time. My husband doesn't, this isn't from me. I hear these kinds of things. My husband just doesn't want to work on himself. My husband doesn't do this. I am the only one. My wife doesn't appreciate me. So how can you change that story? And where's the power that you're handing away to your husband, to your wife, to your lover, to your mother, to your father, to your children? What's the power that you're giving away by letting that story run your life and stand in between the heart connection that you have with that other person? And then what is the political story that we're feeding into that we could start to pick apart and find the holes and the gaps in? These are points of inquiry that I think will be up for us over the next couple of weeks. And whatever storylines we are shifting and changing and opening right now feed into the imaginative process that we are all in as we are transforming the world, as we are creating the future. That's really the potential of this time. Speaking of potential, speaking of overarching narratives and amazing soul work, I'm going to be at the Omega Institute from September 2nd through 6th. If you are curious about what we've talked about today, if you want to do a deep dive and uncover some of your shadows, if you want to really access more of your own sacred spiritual power, sign up for that course. I can't tell you how life-changing this work is. I've watched people fall in love after years and decades of being single just because they've been able to reframe their past hurts, and they've been able to really believe in the power of their ability to receive goodness. I've watched people have miraculous turnarounds in their finances, in their work life. I've watched people's lives transform doing this work. So September 2nd through 6th at the Omega Institute, it's eomega.org. And you can just do a search for me, or you can look up Modern Day Magic, and that is my course. I will also put links to the workshop here on the show notes. And if you'd like to share your narrative and share your story, or you'd like to connect with others who are doing similar things, join our member-only community at therachellengshow.com. So next week, we'll be back with a special guest. And thank you so much for listening to the Future Report. It is so great, as always, to be with you. And I hope you feel my gratitude, and I hope you feel my love. Have a wonderful, wonderful week.